My husband spotted a silver hair and said, "I refuse to be with an old lady." After that, the heating in the stairwell barely worked, so the air on the fourth-floor landing always held a faint chill. Aisha Harmon took the last steps slowly, shoulders weighted down by a battered leather briefcase in one hand and a sagging grocery bag in the other. Her legs ached from another long day at the plant. The elevator had been out of order for weeks, turning every trip home into a small endurance test after 12 hours of engineering spreadsheets, blueprints, and numbers. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. The key slipped once before it found the lock. As she stepped into the condo, the quiet felt wrong. The air was heavy, as if someone had argued here, and the words were still clinging to the walls. Darnell's jacket hung on the hook, and the murmur of the television drifted from the living room. She kicked off her heels and slid the chain off the door out of habit. His voice reached her before she even saw him. He wanted to know why she was late. She answered with a tired explanation about a meeting that ran over and an urgent set of calculations the CEO wanted before morning. She put the groceries on the counter, pulled out chicken, vegetables, bread, and thought vaguely that she had no idea what exactly she had tossed into the cart on her way home. Her body moved automatically. Cutting board, running water, the hiss of the faucet, every action so familiar it didn't require thought. From the doorway, Darnell repeated her words back to her in a mocking tone. 2 hours he'd been home. 2 hours waiting. 2 hours listening to her choose work over her family. Aisha washed the chicken with steady hands, feeling an old knot tighten inside her chest. She had heard that sharp, sour note in his voice before, and knew where it usually led. She said she needed 40 minutes to throw dinner together. He popped open a beer and took a noisy sip, repeating 40 minutes, as if it were an insult. Then his eyes narrowed. He studied her the way someone inspected a worn-out object. He told her to look at herself. At first she thought he meant the dark circles under her eyes or the wrinkles at the corners from years of squinting at machinery and monitors. Only when he mentioned her hair did she truly see it. In the dark reflection of the kitchen window, a thin streak near her temple caught the light. When she stepped into the hallway where the mirror hung, the overhead bulb made it obvious. Fine silver strands threaded through her dark hair on both sides of her face. Nothing dramatic, nothing wild. Just the beginning of age showing itself in small lines of pallor. She touched the streaks as if they were foreign objects someone had glued there. She was 42. Numbers had never frightened her. She was comfortable with production quotas, efficiency percentages, and budgets. But somehow 42 with gray hair began to echo in her mind like a sentence passed down from some unseen judge. Behind her, Darnell told her she had sat down and grown old. He didn't say it with gentleness or teasing. He said it as a verdict. He said he felt like he was 60 whenever he stood next to her. He said he didn't want to live with an old lady, and that he refused to pretend he was fine with their life. His words didn't register at first. Years of routine made her brain want to turn toward the stove, toward seasoning the chicken, toward getting something in the oven. Instead she found herself standing in the bedroom doorway watching him drag a duffel bag out of the closet. He tossed shirts and jeans into it, not bothering to fold anything. She asked what he was doing even though it was obvious. He said he was leaving. He said he was tired. He said he was done. Memories flashed through her mind in disjointed bursts. Darnell in his college hoodie, grinning at her across a diner table when they were both in their 20s. Darnell holding her hand in the fertility clinic waiting room. Darnell sitting on the floor of this same bedroom years earlier, promising his auto repair shop would change everything. All of it pressed against the present moment where he yanked his arm away when she tried to touch him. She reminded him of how long they'd been together, of how many years they had shared. He responded by telling her she had been happy, not them. That she had her projects and her plant and her career, while he had nothing but a front-row seat to her success. She tried to say she had always supported him, paid more of the rent, shouldered the mortgage, funded his shop when he wanted to be his own boss. He mimicked her words and tossed them aside as if they were meaningless. When she asked if there was someone else, she already knew the answer. He confirmed it anyway, more amused than ashamed. The woman was 28, he added, with no grey hair, no tired face, no burned-out energy. He described her as making a sales pitch, as though Aisha were a potential buyer who needed to understand the superior features of the new model. In the entryway, he pulled his ring off and set it by the keys. The gesture was slow and deliberate, like he wanted her to watch. He told her again he refused to live with an old lady. Then the front door slammed, and the sound rattled the picture frames. The silence that followed was almost physical. Aisha stood in the hallway with her fingers wrapped around the smooth band on her own hand. The metal had been there so long it felt like part of her skin. Her knees folded under her, and she sank down, curling inward as if she could protect herself from the invisible shards of her life that seemed to be falling around her. Memories came in waves. The cramped rented apartment with the peeling wallpaper where they had once eaten dinner on overturned boxes. The excitement of signing the mortgage papers for this condo. Late nights when she had studied new software for the plant while Darnell slept beside her. She thought of the times he had laughed at her jokes, the times he had held her when they got the news that children might not be in their future. She didn't cry loudly. The sound that left her throat was small and broken, the sound of someone who didn't want the neighbors to hear that her world had just shifted. Eventually she forced herself up, moved like a sleepwalker into the bathroom, and flipped on the light. Her reflection stared back, eyes swollen, cheeks wet, and those thin threads of silver glistening under the harsh bulb. It struck her then that the grey had not simply appeared overnight. It had been creeping in quietly, like fatigue that became normal. She had not noticed it because she had no time to see it. Work, responsibilities, budgets, deadlines. They had filled her days so completely it hadn't occurred to her to lean in close to the mirror and search for signs of age. She turned away from the glass, switched off the light, and returned to the kitchen. The cut chicken still sat clean and ready. Darnell's half-empty beer can wait by the sink. She put the chicken into the refrigerator, poured the beer down the drain despite the smell, rinsed the can, and set it carefully with the recyclables. Her body clung to routine as if repetition could hold her together. When she finally sat at the kitchen table, the city outside the window glowed with apartment lights and traffic. Somewhere in that maze of streets, Darnell was with a younger woman, laughing and flirting, maybe telling stories he had once reserved for Aisha. The condo around her felt suddenly too large, too quiet, as if the furniture itself were holding its breath. Her hands rested on the table, strong, capable hands that had guided projects, balanced budgets, held heavy folders of schematics. Those hands had signed every check for the mortgage, had swiped a card for groceries in lean months, had written out expenses for Darnell's failed repair shop. Now they lay still, and the question that rose in her mind was simple and terrifying. What now? Eventually she went to the bedroom but didn't bother changing clothes. She lay across the bedspread, staring at the cracked line in the ceiling paint, listening to the hum of distant traffic. When the alarm clock numbers blinked 11 p.m., she reminded herself that morning always came. There would be another day at the plant. There would be equations and graphs to finish. Whether her heart wanted it or not, time would move forward. The alarm dragged her out of sleep at 6:30. For a moment, she couldn't place the heavy stone lodged in her chest. Then memory slid back into place. The argument, the bag, the slammed door, the empty half of the bed. For a second she thought about pulling the blanket over her head and letting the day pass without her. Then the years of discipline took over. She rose, one movement at a time. In the bathroom mirror, her face looked worse than the night before. Puffy eyelids, sallow complexion, the grey streaks now more visible because she knew exactly where to look. She splashed cold water, then hot, trying to shock herself into some semblance of life. Under the cabinet, she found cooling eye patches and pressed them under her eyes while she brushed her teeth. She didn't have the luxury of falling apart. The plant didn't pause for heartbreak. She chose her armor carefully, a precise black pantsuit, a crisp white blouse, and a tailored grey blazer. She twisted her hair into a low bun, adjusting it until the streaks blended into the darker strands. A thin layer of makeup smoothed her skin into a professional mask. By the time she clicked the condo door shut behind her, The woman walking down the hallway looked composed and unshakable. The plant greeted her with its usual chorus of machine hum, metallic clangs, and the distant hiss of steam. The security guard at the gate nodded, as he always did. She walked across the yard, the winter air biting through her coat. Inside the administrative building, fluorescent lights buzzed, the smell of oil faintly carried in the vents. In the hallway, Mike Evans, the head of production, called out to her. He wanted to know if her calculations for the modernization project were ready. Aisha managed a believable smile and promised to have them before lunch. His mention of Mr. Peterson's interest reminded her that other things besides her marriage still mattered. Her office was a shared space on the second floor, a rectangular room with 3 desks and 1 high window. She was early. Her co-workers hadn't arrived yet. The emptiness was a blessing. She sank into her chair, woke her computer, and spread out the blueprints for the new automation line. The numbers on the screen blurred for a few seconds as thoughts about Darnell threatened to invade, then slowly sharpened as she forced herself to focus. Engineering was its own language, one she had learned long before she had met her husband. When the variables lined up, when a system balanced, there was a sense of order that soothed her. Through the morning, she clung to that order. She checked calculations, adjusted figures, and verified assumptions. The ugly words from last night buzzed at the edges of her mind. Old lady, burned out, gray, but every equation she finished pushed them farther away. By the time her younger colleague Tanisha breezed in with a cheerful greeting, Aisha was deep enough in the work that she could answer in a level tone and keep her eyes on the monitor. Tanisha asked about the project. Aisha gave a brief answer without offering details about the chaos at home. The younger woman moved on, chatting about something else, and Aisha let it wash over her unheard. Near 11, the last of the figures fell into place. A weird quiet washed through her as she printed the final pages and tucked them into a neat folder. She carried the folder down the hallway toward the CEO's office, each step feeling heavier than it should. At the door, she took a breath and knocked. Mr. Charles Peterson sat behind a wide desk, gray at the temples, glasses balanced low on his nose as he scanned some paperwork. He greeted her warmly and asked if she had finished the calculations. She set the folder in front of him and explained that the project was ready to move to the next stage if approved. He scanned through the pages, his expression focused but pleased. He complimented her work, remarking on the thoroughness of her models and the projected savings. Then, almost casually, he shifted topics. A senior engineer was retiring soon, he said. A high-level role in the advanced engineering division would be opening. There would be a formal competition with 3 candidates, and she was one of them. He didn't hide the fact that she was considered the frontrunner, especially after the recently completed project. As he spoke about increased responsibility, a higher salary, and long-term influence over the plant's development, Aisha tried to listen. Part of her mind was doing quick math, her current income versus the new potential amount. Another part of her was still stuck in the hallway of her condo, watching her husband remove his ring and call her old. The two realities pressed against each other so hard that for a moment she felt dizzy. She thanked Mr. Peterson politely and promised to prepare for the presentation scheduled for the following week. When she stepped back into the corridor, her legs trembled. The plant's hum sounded different suddenly, like a distant ocean roar. She leaned briefly against the wall, letting the news settle. A promotion like this would change everything. Her status, her finances, and perhaps most significantly, who she understood herself to be. Serena, an engineer from a neighboring division and one of the few people Aisha considered a true friend, spotted her and asked why she looked so dazed. Aisha suggested they get coffee. In the quiet corner of the cafeteria, with cups warming their hands, the mask cracked. The words came out blunt and simple. Her husband had left. He had called her old, mocked her gray hair, and walked out to be with a much younger woman. Serena stared, then swore softly under her breath in disbelief. She reached across the table and gripped Aisha's fingers, anchoring her in the moment. Aisha spoke in a steady voice that betrayed how recently she had rehearsed this explanation only in her own head. She recounted the duffel bag, the confession about the 28-year-old, the wedding ring placed on the table like a discarded coin. Serena listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to anger. When Aisha murmured that maybe Darnell was right, that at 42 with grey hair and constant exhaustion she was becoming what he accused her of being, Serena cut her off sharply. She was only a year younger than Aisha, she said, and already had grey strands too. Under that logic, did that make her an old woman as well? Of course not. This, she insisted, had nothing to do with hair color and everything to do with a man who couldn't handle a wife whose career outpaced his own. Serena reminded her of other women they knew whose husbands had left at the exact moment their careers took off. The excuses had always been similar: too much time at work, not enough focus on the home, changed priorities. The pattern was clear once you bothered to look. Aisha's heart clenched as she realized how neatly her own story fit the same mold. When Serena casually mentioned that she'd heard about the upcoming competition and suspected Aisha would be chosen, Aisha admitted that Mr. Peterson had already spoken to her and made it clear she was the favorite. Instead of delight, she felt numbness. The promotion seemed almost irrelevant compared to the wreckage of her marriage. Serena would not let her sink into that numbness. She framed the opportunity as something more than a job, a chance to take back control of her own life, to build something that was hers alone. She told Aisha that real revenge against someone who had written her off as finished was not screaming or begging. It was living well and succeeding without them. Aisha looked at her friend and felt, for the first time since the previous evening, a thin line of heat that was not grief. It wasn't joy yet, but it was something close to resolve. By the time they returned to their offices, an idea had begun to form, faint but distinct. Aisha opened the file for the modernization project presentation and started translating numbers into charts, graphs, and bullet points. With each slide she crafted, the shape of her future sharpened. Her life would not be defined by Darnell's departure. It would be measured by what she did next. That evening, she went to Serena's apartment instead of returning straight home. Over red wine and simple food, she talked more openly than she had in years. She listed the ways she'd supported Darnell, paying more of the rent, carrying the mortgage when his jobs fell through, giving him the entire savings they had scraped together so he could open a repair shop that failed within 6 months. Serena listened, then calmly pointed out what Aisha had never allowed herself to say aloud. He had used her stability as a safety net while resenting the very success that made that net possible. The realization didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like someone pulling back a curtain she hadn't known was there. Somewhere between one glass and the next, Aisha heard herself say she needed a lawyer. Not later, not someday, but now. The condo was in both their names, but she had paid most of the mortgage. She had documents. She wanted to know her legal ground before Darnell's choices dictated everything. Serena didn't hesitate. She promised to send her the number of a woman she knew at a reputable law firm. When Aisha eventually went back to her condo that night, the rooms looked the same as always. Couch, television, framed photos, bed. Yet she moved differently through them. The absence of her husband's presence still hurt, but underneath the ache was a growing certainty. She wasn't going to sit and wait for him to decide what became of the life she had largely built. The following day, the plant's clatter felt slightly less overwhelming. Aisha's heart still lurched whenever a stray memory of Darnell's harsh words surfaced, but the edge of shock had dulled. Routine helped. She reviewed drafts of the presentation between meetings, refining phrases and diagrams, adjusting figures until even her naturally meticulous mind was satisfied. At lunch, she slipped away to call the lawyer Serena had recommended, a woman named Evelyn Pierce. Her voice over the phone was firm but not unfriendly. She asked for a quick summary of the situation. Aisha explained the basics. Long marriage, no children, jointly owned condo but disproportionate financial contribution. A husband who had abruptly left and clearly had another relationship. Ms. Pierce asked precise questions about account statements, receipts, dates, and income levels. By the end of the call, they had scheduled an in-person meeting for 2 days later. The evening before that meeting, Aisha stayed late at the plant. The familiar smell of metal and oil under the fluorescent lights felt almost comforting. She worked on the slides for the division head competition, making sure every section told a clear story. What the plant's current challenges were, how her previous projects had addressed similar issues, and where the new modernization plan would take them in the next 5 years. The numbers told a tidy narrative if she arranged them carefully enough. At home, she dug through folders and boxes for financial records. Stacks of bank statements covered her kitchen table by midnight. It was startling to see 20 years of shared life laid out in rows of figures. Each line represented a transfer, a bill, a mortgage payment, a purchase. Patterns emerged that she had never bothered to track before. The vast majority of the mortgage payments came from her account. The initial down payment on the condo was clearly traced to her savings. Major furniture purchases appeared on her credit card, followed by months of diligent payments. There were deposits from Darnell too, of course, occasional chunks when his jobs were steady, sporadic contributions that helped but seldom matched her own. Looking at the numbers, the reality she'd refused to name became undeniable. She had not just worked a bit more. She had carried the structure of their life financially, steadily, quietly, and without receipt for gratitude. She organized the statements into chronological order and highlighted the payments tied to the condo. Each highlight felt like drawing a boundary. By the time she stacked everything in a neat folder labeled with her own handwriting, she was exhausted but oddly calm. The meeting with Ms. Pierce took place in a modest office downtown. Framed certificates hung on the walls, and a plant drooped in one corner. The lawyer listened without interruption as Aisha described the argument, the insult about her hair, the confession about the younger woman, and the departure. She spoke about the condo, the mortgage, the failed repair shop they had funded with shared savings, and the lack of children. Ms. Pierce took notes, occasionally asking for dates or clarifications. When Aisha handed over the folder of statements and receipts, the lawyer's eyebrows rose slightly. She leafed through the pages with the clinical efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times. Her initial assessment was straightforward. In their jurisdiction, property acquired during marriage was generally divided equally, but courts often took actual contributions into account, especially when supported by clear evidence. With what Aisha had provided, there was a strong chance she could retain a majority stake in the condo. They discussed options. It was possible to file for divorce and simultaneous division of assets. Darnell's car would be included, as would Aisha's, though hers was newer and technically worth more. The lawyer didn't promise miracles, but she projected confidence that the case would lean heavily in Aisha's favor. The key factors were financial documentation, her stable long-term job, and the absence of any serious misconduct on her part. Aisha listened to all of this with the sensation of standing on a shoreline watching the tide slowly recede, revealing rocks and patterns previously hidden beneath the waves. Her life, once a single unbroken story of us, was being separated into shareable parts: property, income, names on paper. It should have felt bleak. Instead, it felt like clarity. When Ms. Pierce asked whether she wanted to proceed, Aisha surprised herself by answering immediately. She did. There was no shakiness in her voice, only a firm acceptance. The lawyer outlined the next steps: drafting papers, filing with the court, sending Darnell the summons and proposals. The process would take months, but the first cut in the legal tie could happen quickly. The day after this meeting, Aisha's focus shifted back toward the competition. The presentation date crept closer, and the plant seemed to lean in with anticipation. She spent evenings tweaking visuals and rehearsing quietly in her cubicle after everyone left. She built not just an argument for the project but a vision for the entire advanced engineering division. Mentoring younger engineers, balancing innovation with stability, and integrating new technology without abandoning proven methods. Serena checked on her constantly, sometimes dropping into her office just to crack a joke or share a story. Omar and Tanisha noticed the strain in Aisha's face but respected the distance she maintained about her personal life. They rallied around her professionally instead, offering to gather data or run additional simulations in support of her project. At home, the condo felt more like a workplace than a shared space. Aisha would walk in, drop her bag on the table, and go straight to the folder of financial documents or the laptop with her slides. Darnell's remaining items, jackets in the closet, car magazines on the coffee table, a watch on the bedroom dresser, felt increasingly out of place. She began collecting them into neat piles in her mind, even before she physically moved them. It was as if her thoughts were packing him away ahead of time. She slept restlessly, often waking in the early morning hours with her heart racing. But instead of replaying the argument, her mind now rehearsed answers to potential questions the committee might ask, about maintenance schedules, cost recovery periods, or staffing. Work became the rope she used to pull herself forward. On the eve of the presentation, she sat again at Serena's kitchen table. They ate simple food, shared a bottle of wine, and talked about the future rather than the past. Serena reminded her with stubborn affection how many crises she had navigated at the plant. Major breakdowns, budget cuts, emergency redesigns. If she could handle those with calm competence, she could manage a competition where the main requirement was to talk about her own achievements. Lying on Serena's sofa that night, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, Aisha stared at the dim ceiling. She thought about her gray hair, about the word old Darnell had thrown at her like an accusation. Then she pictured herself standing in front of the committee, presenting 20 years of work with charts and confidence. For the first time, she saw those silver strands not just as proof of age but as proof of years lived, problems solved, and burdens carried. The fear that rose inside her now wasn't about losing Darnell. That loss, painful as it was, had hardened into something more final. The fear was that she might undermine herself in front of the committee, downplay her own value, revert to the habit of making herself small so others felt comfortable. She fell asleep finally with one stubborn thought echoing under the worry. This time, she would not shrink. When the morning of the competition arrived, the city sky was still dark when Aisha woke before the alarm. Her pulse pounded as if she were back in university on an exam day. Serena's apartment was quiet. The world seemed to hold its breath. She showered and dressed slowly, choosing a dark blue pantsuit with a clean, simple cut, a plain white blouse, and understated silver earrings. The outfit was not intended to impress so much as to anchor her. In the mirror, she gathered her hair into a low bun again, smoothing it until only faint streaks of silver were visible. She studied her reflection for a long moment. The woman looking back at her was not the old lady Darnell had named, but a professional with 2 decades of experience etched into the set of her shoulders. At the plant, the conference room reserved for the competition gradually filled. A long table stood at the front, where the committee members sat. Mr. Peterson, the chief engineer, the head of production, a union representative, and 2 people from corporate. Chairs for the candidates were arranged in a row at the side. Walter Price, a seasoned engineer with more years at the plant than Aisha, adjusted his glasses and sorted a thick stack of papers. Andre Nelson, younger, energetic, scrolled through slides on his sleek laptop. Aisha greeted them politely, then sat with her own laptop resting on her knees, going over her talking points one last time in her head. Walter presented first. His tone was steady, his experience obvious. His slides were dense with text, his suggestions leaning toward gradual improvements, cautious upgrades, and minimal risk. The committee nodded respectfully. Next, Andre strode to the front, confident and fast-talking. He spoke of digital transformation, artificial intelligence, and cutting-edge sensors. His slides were polished, full of striking images and buzzwords, but light on detailed calculations. When her turn came, Aisha's hands trembled slightly as she plugged in her laptop, yet her voice emerged calm when she introduced herself. She began not with grand abstractions but with the life of the plant itself. She briefly walked them through the project she had already completed there. The redesign of one production line that had reduced scrap dramatically, the small but critical automation tweaks that had saved energy over the years, the projects that had paid for themselves in months, not years. She showed photos of the machinery before and after previous upgrades, charts of productivity increases, and tables of cost savings. If Walter had offered stability and Andre had offered novelty, Aisha offered evidence. Her modernization plan built on that history, combining new technologies with proven methods. She spoke about sensors and software, but only after she explained how they would interact with existing systems, what training workers would need, and what the payback period would be. As questions came, her nerves eased. She knew these numbers. She lived in this world. When the corporate representatives asked about risk, she broke the answer down into categories and mitigation strategies without stalling. When the union representative inquired about the impact on jobs, she explained how automation would shift tasks rather than eliminate them, freeing workers for higher skill responsibilities and reducing dangerous manual interventions. When the last slide faded from the screen, she concluded with a clear, simple statement of her vision for the Advanced Engineering Division. A team that respected experienced workers, fostered younger talent, and balanced innovation with reliability. She didn't raise her voice or use dramatic flourishes. She simply laid out the path she saw in front of them and how she planned to lead them down it. Afterward, she returned to her seat feeling drained but steady. The committee thanked all 3 candidates and asked them to wait elsewhere while they deliberated. Aisha walked the corridors of the plant in slow circles, barely seeing the familiar walls. Serena spotted her and pressed a cup of water into her hand, demanding a blunt verdict on how it had gone. Aisha confessed she had no idea. She had done everything she could. The rest was no longer in her control. Hours later, the 3 candidates were called back to the conference room. Aisha's chest tightened as she entered. Everyone on the committee looked serious, but there was no hint of the decision in their faces. Mr. Peterson thanked them for their strong presentations and acknowledged how difficult the choice had been. A short pause stretched into what felt like an eternity. Then he announced that the committee had unanimously selected Aisha Harmon as the new head of the Advanced Engineering Division, effective December 1st. The world seemed to tilt. For a heartbeat, the room's sounds faded. Then the details returned in sharp focus: the grain of the wooden table, the ticking of the clock, Walter's tight but polite smile, Andre's forced congratulations, the firm grip of the chief engineer's handshake as he told her the modernization project had been the decisive factor. Colleagues gathered around her afterward, offering hugs, handshakes, and jokes about her becoming the boss. Serena practically sprinted across the hallway to pull her into a fierce embrace. For a few minutes, Aisha let herself feel the raw joy of it, unfiltered by guilt or doubt. She had not just survived the last weeks, she had moved forward. Later, alone in her cubicle, she opened her work journal, running her fingers over pages full of scribbles, diagrams, and calculations from years past. She took out her phone and sent Ms. Pierce a short message, explaining that she had just been promoted and would be earning a significantly higher salary. Within minutes, the lawyer responded with congratulations and confirmed that this information would be important for the ongoing case. Aisha left the plant late. The security guard congratulated her with genuine warmth as she passed through the gate. Outside, the air was sharp and cold. Smoke stacks rose against the darkening sky, their silhouettes oddly comforting. She stood for a moment and looked at the familiar buildings, understanding that her relationship with this place had changed forever. She was no longer one of many engineers. She was the person responsible for guiding the division's future. At home, the condo met her with its usual, echoing quiet. Darnell's shirts still hung in the closet. His magazines still lay stacked in the bedroom. Something inside her had shifted enough that their presence now felt like clutter rather than absence. She pulled out boxes from storage and began folding his things with a precision she usually reserved for important reports. She sorted shirts, jeans, and jackets, arranging them neatly. She didn't toss anything onto the floor or tear anything in anger. The orderliness calmed her. His expensive watch rested on the bedside table, a birthday gift she had purchased years ago after months of careful saving. She left it there, a small symbol she refused to carry into her new life. When she finished packing his belongings, 4 labeled boxes stood in the hallway, ready for him to collect. In the kitchen, she switched on her laptop and opened a blank document. The glow of the screen bathed the table in pale light. She wrote a short note addressed to him. In it, she informed him of her promotion and her new role as head of the Advanced Engineering Division. She included the salary figure, not to brag, but as a factual detail relevant to the legal process. She explained in flat, simple language that the divorce petition and asset division documents were on the table, already filed through a lawyer. She mentioned that his packed belongings were in the hallway and asked him to leave his keys on the entry table when he came to retrieve them. There were no insults, no apologies, no pleas. The note was stripped of emotion, like a technical report summarizing the current status of a system and the next required actions. She printed it, placed it in the center of the table, and arranged the legal documents beside it. The formal petition, the division proposal, the bank statements that showed her contributions, and the official letter confirming her promotion and salary. It was all there, silent and undeniable. After packing a small bag of essentials, she called Serena and asked if she could stay again. Serena told her to come over immediately and joked about needing to open another bottle of something sparkling. Aisha stood in the doorway of the condo for a long moment before leaving. She looked around at the familiar furniture, the photos, the marks on the wall from old picture frames. The space that had once seemed like a shared dream now felt like a stage she was stepping off. She locked the door, walked down the stairs, and drove to Serena's apartment. As the city lights slid past her windshield, she felt a strange lightness threaded through the fatigue. A major part of her life had ended, but the outline of something new was beginning to appear, as if someone had flipped a transparency on an overhead projector. That evening, Serena toasted to her new title and called her the Queen of Advanced Engineering. They laughed, clinked glasses, and stayed up late talking about management strategies, training plans, and the kind of leader Aisha wanted to be. When she finally lay down on the sofa, she thought of Darnell returning to the condo and finding her note on the table. For the first time since he had left, the idea of his reaction did not cause fear or longing. It stirred only a quiet curiosity and a sense of completion. 3 days after he had stormed out of the condo, Darnell returned. The old Chevy rattled as he parked near the entrance, the cold air making tiny puffs of exhaust around the tailpipe. He had spent the previous days at a small rented studio on the edge of town with Kylie, the 28-year-old woman he had chosen as his escape from a life he no longer wanted to face. Those days felt almost like a mini vacation. Kylie cooked simple meals, laughed at his jokes, and didn't press him about bills or long-term plans. But that morning, she reminded him the lease was ending soon. They needed to sort out the question of where they would live next. Darnell announced that he would go take care of the condo, imagining as he climbed the familiar stairs, that Aisha would be home, shattered, perhaps still hoping he would change his mind. He opened the door with his key, already composing lines in his head about moving forward and being fair. The condo was quiet. No sounds from the kitchen, no clatter of pots, no rustle of pages from the living room where Aisha liked to read. He called her name. No answer came back. In the kitchen, the table was strangely organized. There was a sheet of paper placed right in the center, with several documents stacked neatly beside it. For a moment, he thought Aisha had written a plea, some long explanation full of emotion. Instead, his eyes slid down cool, compact sentences. The note informed him that she had been promoted to head of the Advanced Engineering Division, with a yearly salary that eclipsed his own by more than threefold. It stated that divorce papers had already been filed, along with a proposed division of assets based on documented contributions. It mentioned that his belongings were packed in boxes in the hallway and requested that he leave his keys on the table when he collected them. He stared at the number on the page, $150,000, so long that the digits began to blur. He grabbed the official letter from the plant, verifying that the promotion was real. Corporate seal. Formal language. Start date. The weight of the paper itself felt like a slap. Then he skimmed the legal documents. At first, he read inattentively, assuming some standard split. As his brain caught up with the wording, his jaw tightened. The proposal suggested that Aisha be granted a larger portion of the condo's value based on the fact that she had paid most of the mortgage. Attached were the bank statements, carefully highlighted, showing payment after payment from her account. His own contributions appeared rarely, smaller amounts scattered among lines that documented his personal spending. Until that moment, he had believed, without examining the numbers, that they had carried the household together. Seeing the history laid out in ink was like watching a recording of his life from a camera he hadn't known was running. It showed something he had never wanted to admit. While he had drifted from job to job, chasing the feeling of appreciation and significance, she had quietly ensured every bill got paid. He pushed the papers aside and paced through the condo, the rooms suddenly unfamiliar. In the bedroom, the closet door hung open. His side was empty. Her clothes remained. On his bedside table, some of his little items were gone, while others, a magazine, a half-used aftershave bottle, still sat where he had left them. On her side, a simple arrangement of everyday objects remained: a paperback novel, reading glasses, hand cream. It was the life of a woman who worked long days, came home exhausted, read a little, and did her best to take care of herself. In the hallway mirror, he caught his own reflection. He saw a man 10 years older than he still thought of himself as. Thinning hair, wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, a face that sagged ever so slightly with tiredness. There were grey strands at his temples too, only hidden by a habit of keeping his hair cut short. For the first time, the irony hit him with full force. He had called Aisha an old lady, while looking almost exactly like the male version of what he had accused her of being. In the hallway, 4 boxes stood stacked neatly by the wall. He opened one. Inside, his shirts were folded carefully, seams lined up. Another held his jeans, socks paired and sorted. Another contained his car magazines and small personal items. It would have been easy for Aisha to stuff everything into trash bags or dump them in the hall. Instead, she had taken the time to organize his belongings. Even after everything, she had chosen order over spite. He returned to the kitchen and picked up the divorce petition again. The date of filing near the top told him this had been set in motion very quickly after he left. While he had been congratulating himself for finally taking control of his life with Kylie, Aisha had been quietly taking legal steps to end their marriage on her own terms. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Kylie asked if he was on his way back. She was cooking dinner. He stared at the screen but didn't answer. He sat down heavily at the table instead and closed his eyes. Memories rose uninvited. Aisha at 22, wearing a cheap blazer, excited about her first big assignment at the plant. Aisha slipped him a few bills during his college years, laughing that he'd pay her back by being a genius mechanic one day. Aisha wrote out the check for the condo's down payment with hands that shook from the size of the sum. Aisha placed an envelope with their savings in his hands when he announced he wanted to open his own repair shop, trusting him without conditions. He remembered, too, the way she had hugged him when that shop failed, pressing her face into his shoulder, telling him they would find another way and that what mattered most was that they were together. She had not listed the hours she had worked or the sacrifices she had made. She had not demanded repayment. At the time, he had been grateful. Somewhere along the line, the gratitude had curdled into resentment. He had watched her advance, taking on bigger projects while his own career stalled in a comfortable but limited role at a dealership. Instead of facing his disappointment in himself, he blamed her drive for making him feel small. The gray hair he had noticed was, in truth, a symptom of the life she had lived. Long hours, responsibility, the weight of holding everything together. He had turned it into an insult because it was easier than admitting his own failures. After a long time sitting with these thoughts, he stood, gathered the documents, and placed them back on the table. He walked through the condo one more time, tracing the familiar path from bedroom to kitchen to living room. Each space held echoes of arguments and shared jokes, of holidays spent just the two of them when the topic of children became too painful to invite others into their home. Now those echoes faded, replaced by the rustle of his own movements and the knowledge that this chapter was closing. He slipped off his keys, set them beside the note like a period at the end of a sentence, and carried the boxes down to the car. Before driving away, he sat behind the wheel, staring at the building. His phone buzzed again with another message from Kylie. He typed a short response saying he would be there soon, then paused. The words looked small on the screen, flimsy compared to the weight of what he had just lost. Kylie, in his mind, suddenly looked different. Not worse, not better, just younger, with her own hopes and illusions. She wanted fun, attention, perhaps a better life than the cramped studio offered. She didn't know the full story of his marriage, his finances, or his resentments. She had become, without fully realizing it, a symbol of the youth and freedom he felt slipping away. As he drove back toward the small apartment they were sharing, his thoughts churned. Legally, he might walk away with a chunk of money from the condo. He might start another venture or move to a different city. On paper, there were possibilities. Emotionally, though, a hollow space had opened that he doubted any new relationship or project could fill in the same way. That night, sitting at the tiny kitchen table in the rented studio, he listened to Kylie talk about her day at the mall. Her words seemed to come from far away. The food on his plate tasted like nothing. He lay awake long after she had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling, the glow from the street lamp cutting a pale line across the wall. The question turning over and over in his mind was not whether he should apologize or try to go back. Those doors felt firmly closed. But when exactly he had started confusing feeling important with being loved. Across the city, Aisha didn't spend that night thinking about him. She focused on transition plans at the plant, on meetings scheduled with Mr. Peterson and the outgoing head of the division. She listened to Serena's teasing about the perks of a higher salary and quietly planned what it would mean to carry a leadership role on her shoulders. When she did go back to the condo briefly to check on the state of things, she found the boxes gone and the keys left neatly on the entry table. The note and documents were no longer on the kitchen table. She walked through the apartment slowly, absorbing the absence of his belongings. For the first time, the space felt entirely hers. Not theirs. Hers. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching children playing in the courtyard despite the cold. After a few minutes, she unlocked her phone and scrolled through old photos. She didn't delete them. Instead, she created a folder labeled Past and moved all the pictures that contained Darnell into it. The gesture was small but symbolic. Those years would always exist in her memory, but they wouldn't sit at the center of her life anymore. As days turned into weeks, preparations for her new role filled her hours. She met with team members, listened to their ideas and frustrations, and began sketching long-term plans for the division. Serena remained her constant ally, reminding her to celebrate each small victory and not to forget to rest. The legal process moved forward at its own steady pace. Ms. Pierce kept her informed of each step. Occasionally, a new letter or update would arrive, and Aisha would read it with steady eyes. The old sting of loss never fully vanished, but it no longer controlled her. It had become a scar rather than an open wound. One evening, months later, she caught her reflection in a glass door at the plant. The gray strands at her temples were more visible now. Time, stress, and responsibility had continued their work. This time she didn't look away. She didn't reach up to hide them. She simply recognized them as part of her story, evidence that she had survived, worked, and grown. In the voiceover she imagined for a video on the Betty-style channel, she knew exactly how she would describe it. She would talk about a woman who thought her value diminished with every silver hair and who learned, through heartbreak and hard work, that her worth lay not in youth or smooth skin but in the knowledge, resilience, and courage she had built over years. She would say that sometimes the cruelest words someone throws at you become the push you need to step into the life you deserved all along. She would raise an invisible glass in her mind, not to revenge but to freedom. The quiet, steady kind that comes when you choose yourself and refuse to apologize for growing older, stronger, and more yourself than ever before.